Hey y'all, I'm Kelly Moody and you're listening to the Ground Shots podcast, an audio project exploring our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling with farmers, herbalists, craftspeople, naturalists, artists, and more.
Logs of locust cedar splits, I offer sweat and splinters. Forest elders breathe their last, I'll bring them for your supper.
Hey y'all, it's Kelly. Welcome to the Ground Shots podcast. This episode of the podcast features a conversation with Ramona Moonflower Rubin. She studied cultural ecology at the University of Santa Cruz and has a master's in public health from the University of Michigan. Her path is one of making connections between human and ecological health. I sat down and had a brief conversation with Ramona this past winter after we both participated in the March to Oak Flat in February with the Apache Stronghold. So the March to Oak Flat happened near the San Carlos Apache Reservation and is a walk from their reservation to this spot, Oak Flat, that is nearby, and it's been happening every year for the past few years. And it's a prayer-focused protest march of sorts that is held to bring awareness to a copper mine that is trying to make its way onto sacred land, the place Oak Flat itself. I talked about that briefly in other episodes of the podcast, and this episode with Ramona is not meant to speak for the Apache Stronghold about this movement in this place in specific, but Ramona is an activist that has been involved in other kinds of activist work in the past, and so she definitely draws some parallels to her past work with this movement, so it comes into the conversation a little bit. So we chatted at Oak Flat after the march and after the couple days after the march, where there's sort of a gathering of people and ceremony and talks and stuff. And this is before we all parted ways. And there's a little wind on the hill where we chatted, so you'll hear it here and there, and other sounds from the outside, the birds, the water, and maybe people talking in the distance, but you can kind of hear a little bit of that place in this episode, but hopefully the wind isn't too bothersome to the audience. I've tried to be careful about that in field interviews, but every now and then it kind of comes out more. I just wanted to warn you about that. So in this episode with Ramona, we talk about Ramona's environmental activism work being involved in protecting old-growth redwoods in the 90's in Northern California. We talk about the different motivations behind the Redwood campaign Ramona was involved in the 90's, and we speak to different ways of approaching direct action. We talk about the connection between salmon and the redwoods. We speak to how the potential for grief increases the more we feel connected to the land around us in a society that does not feel that same connection. Lastly, we talk a bit about forest therapy and Ramona's forest therapy practice. All right, let's go ahead and get to this conversation with Ramona Moonflower. Please do enjoy our conversation at Oak Flat, and happy listening.
Logs of locust cedar splits, I offer sweat and splinters.
We're sitting here at the Oak Flat campground, and it's outside of Superior, Arizona. It's probably the closest little town, on a wonderfully sunny day after many days of rain. And I'm sitting here with Ramona, and we both participated in the March to Oak Flat where we are now, and that was organized by the Apache Stronghold. And we've just been camping here a little longer after it's all done with, and I thought we would sit down here before we part ways and have a chat. So you live in the Bay Area, California, correct? Berkeley or
That's
Oakland?
true. I've lived in Berkeley for about 15 years. I never imagined I would end up in such a city for so long, yet there I am. Mm-hmm. And the Bay is fortunate to have a lot of green space and open space and a lot of environmentally minded people, so I think that's why I'm still in the city, but I really like to get away, and for the last few times in the spring I've come out to Arizona, and this is my third time to Oak Flat and my second time participating in the march with the San Carlos Apache. And this year was quite impressive with all the rain that we got.
Yeah, the last day we were walking, it was like, and running, we both did the running too. It was like torrential downpour, sideways cold rain, and we're all like, we're almost there, we can do it. Yeah, it was magical, and the whole campground filled with rivers and water, and yeah, it was awesome. Yeah. Maybe you could give me a little bit of, we're not going to be speaking for the Apache strongholds and like their intention behind the walk. I think that that's for them to explain, but we could give a little bit of like our perspective on what our experience has been here. And then I'm really curious about how you relate that to your activism you've done over the years in your life in California, and the similarities and differences, and like just how it all feels to you. But I guess, what about this march do you resonate with, and like this campaign and this this form of land defense? What about it resonates with you and like brought you here?
Well, back in the 90s, I was involved in campaigns to protect the last unlogged ancient redwood forests in Northern California. And I was young, and it was a very desperate feeling type of a movement. And in contrast, here I feel like a guest in the Apache's homeland. I've come up here and camped with people who tell stories of their grandmothers and great-great-grandmothers camping here, holding ceremony here, gathering acorns in this place. And it's given me a whole different perspective on this land to camp somewhere among people whose roots go back and whose memories tie them to a place so intimately and so connectedly. I mean, I've felt special just when my dad says, "Oh, this is a cabin I stayed in one summer when I was little." And that used to have a deeply resonating, charm. It still does. It's dwarfed by what I've felt here. The oak trees, the land, the trails, the meaning that it holds for the people who come from this land. To witness that and be around it, it's humbling and awe-inspiring, and it touches that core of what it means to be a person connected to the land and connected to the earth.
Were there a lot of Indigenous folks involved in the Redwood campaign?
There were some, and they definitely played a role in leading sweats in the village, in our base camp, and but they weren't organized. They weren't really inviting the activists to participate with them in the ceremonial meaning of the place. They were kind of curious about what we were up to, and in many ways very involved in their own struggles and protecting places and restoring places. The deepest ancient forests for them were places where the ancestors and the spirits resided, and not really somewhere where they would go to recreate. So the awe-inspiring of the 2,000-year-old trees, 300-foot high canopies, we really brought our own passion and tactics to that movement, and it was very youthful and very impassioned, and I could feel the circle that was called together. The forest meant something very strong, but something different to each and every person that was called there. For some, it represented wilderness and wildness and preservation of things that are good. in the human spirit, and other people it was an ecosystem, and they were concerned about the spotted owls, they were concerned about the salmon runs, they were concerned about long-term sustainability of jobs in the region, and not just a cut it all, mill it all, and then the company moves on to other forests. And this is in the late 90s, and I'm familiar with the campaigns for Headwaters Forest out in Humboldt County, Northern California. And through that kind of symbolic action, and on some level it really is symbolic, because you can't actually believe, I mean, you can hope and pray, but civilian people can only block a logging road for so long. At some point, the police come and they take you to jail, and they open the road up again, and the logging trucks move in, and the cutting of trees continue. So the action, it's really, you're trying to speak through your actions to express what you believe about the sacredness of the place and the wrongness of its destruction. And in hindsight, I see what we were doing as a kind of a ritual, a kind of symbolic action, putting our bodies in between the machines of destruction and the forest that we consider sacred, allowing our bodies to occupy that space, spoke in a way that our words couldn't, as to what we believed and what we wished to stop. And so it's really when all other methods have failed, all you really can do to express the sort of grief and mourning at the enormity of the destruction going on is to simply occupy a space of witnessing, and a space where you're interfering. We did follow a very strict nonviolence code that included no destruction of property, no physical violence, and we're very careful to train everyone coming through camp on those procedures. Judy Berry, a great hero of mine, was a labor organizer as well as an environmental activist. So she really saw the loggers and the workers as pawns, as players in this grand scheme of destruction that we were aiming to turn the tides on. The difference here is really that this is a spiritual movement led by Indigenous people. And in that sense, I feel like I'm a guest here, and I want to do anything that I can to help the struggle here, because witnessing the connection of the tribe to their land, it's a sort of harmony. It makes being human make sense again to me. And I wish that way of life and that connection can continue. I wish that more people can witness it and learn from it and be healed by land that supports its occupants, land that embraces the human element among it, and where it all makes sense together. Witnessing the rain here and all of the water pouring through this landscape, the water really held it together. I mean, the rain was running down the trees and into rivulets and streams and into a whole river that blocked my car from being able to leave for just a couple days. But, I was happy to still be here, so it wasn't too much of a problem not being able to drive across a river. The water tied it all together. I mean, the water moves through us the same way the water moves through the land, and being able to observe it and feel it and know what a blessing it is for human life and for all the creatures that live here. I hope all you listening to this can hear the birds singing in the background here. They've been doing that since a little bit before dawn this morning, and continuing on.
There's a lot of hummingbirds here too. It's been beautiful to see them flitter around.
Yeah, there's a hummingbird nested in a tree right above my tent.
Oh.
It's got its little nest there, and it comes and hovers. It sits on its nest.
I have another question about the campaign to defend the redwoods. So a lot of people have never experienced the redwoods and now can experience what you experienced. And I'm curious what's important about those trees, and like what was at stake. Like you explained it a little bit over the campfire in the past few nights, but now that I've traveled through Northern California and experienced what is there, I'm just like, I can't even imagine like what this place looked like when like most of the forest was like immense redwoods,
Yeah, well, most of the logging around in the San Francisco Bay Area happened in the decade following the 1906 earthquake. So after the earthquake and the fire burned through and destroyed a lot of San Francisco, there was a big rush to rebuild, and that required timber and that required logging of the forests. Farther up north, it was a little slower, but mostly proceeded. And nowadays, if you want to see the redwoods, there are parks, and the parks have railings showing you where you can and can't walk, and it's crowded. You actually need to purchase a parking ticket in advance to visit your woods, and you gotta walk for a serious way before you're out of like dense crowd around there. So they're really like little showcases. Headwaters, we were fighting for an ecosystem. There were 6 large groves of old growth trees, and by old growth I mean these trees were 2,000 years old.
Wow.
And you can count them, because when they've been felled you can see the growth rings on the inside and count back through them, through modern history, and as long as much of recorded history. And 2,000 years ago those trees were just starting to grow. The forests used to be even vaster before the Ice Age. The redwoods, the sequoias were kind of separated into different habitat regions with the ice, is my understanding of it. They've got a third cousin in China, the Metasequoia glyptostroboides, or the dawn redwood, which is actually a deciduous tree. They're, interestingly enough, planted at a lot of post offices around the country. We were fighting for an ecosystem, for an intact ecosystem where dominant predators and a watershed of intact salmon runs could still exist. So not just a couple little cathedral parks that were available for picnicking in, but places where spotted owl, raptors, once you bring logging roads into an area, it loosens the soil flows down and silts up the streams, and the salmon rely on those gravel bars for laying their eggs. So when you have a lot of runoff from the logging roads filling up the creeks and the stream beds, the salmon eggs get silted in, and they don't hatch for the next generation of salmon. Salmon are so critical to the life in the ecosystem. There's been studies on just how much of those ancient forests are made of marine nitrogen. So actually an oceanic origin to the molecules that make up those trees, and that's believed to be through bears and eagles pulling the salmon up out of the streams and eating the choicest organs and letting the salmon carcasses decompose and restore the nutrient cycle through to the soil. So all of these interconnections, all of these webs, people have come to this continent and destroyed those. And our campaign was about keeping one tract intact. And we ended up with a park, and logging continued. it can't continue indefinitely. There's very few mills and nowadays that even can handle logs of that size. I believe most of them have been dismantled, and most of the logging operations are continuing on smaller and second growth trees, although there are some old growth Douglas fir forests out in Petrolia, Lost Coast area that are slated to have logging continue. And those are plans that we opposed 20 years ago and managed to have stopped. And
They're trying again.
They're trying again now.
How does it feel, and what do you do after all that? Like, you did what you could, and like part of it got saved, but a lot of it didn't, and like how do you move from there?
That's a really good question. I had a really hard time. I had a very hard time. I think it was difficult to come down from the intensity of the movement. I think a lot of people who are veterans of wars or any kind of intense campaign could relate to just that feeling of meaning that being wrapped up in something brings to your life. And when that's over, when you don't have that daily sense of meaning and solidarity with the people around you, it's hard. I personally found a lot of solace in spiritual and wisdom traditions, and really just connecting with the world as something greater than myself that I had a connection to, but not necessarily like I couldn't be responsible for all of it, It's a really hard question, and I think it's what faces a lot of people in society, and especially as we move forward and the impacts of climate change start to come around collectively as a society, how we process that grief. It's really crucial, and it's really important, and it's something that in the walks and circles that I hold in the Bay Area, we like to hold space for, because as soon as you start to feel that depth of connection to the world, that intimacy to place, and that relationship to the seasons, the plants, the animals that we share our bioregions with, or that we even just share our yards and our homes with, when we begin to identify with that larger circle of life, we're just increasing the feelings of loss that we can have when we can no longer caretake or protect those other beings from harm. And how as a society do we hold space for that kind of grief? I think that's a really important question and a really big struggle. Hopefully we'll find ways that we can do it with meaning in a graceful way. And I really look to Wensler and his commitment to being home here at Oak Flat, bearing witness to what happens in a peaceful way with love in his heart and a thankfulness to the Creator. For decades, his people have been afraid to visit this site, and he's really a visionary man, and his vision is simple and it's beautiful. It's just to embody everything that is good in the tradition and in humanity to the degree that he can. I think it's a lesson for all of us.
I think a lot about what it means to let yourself love anything, a place, a plant, a person, knowing that it could easily be taken. In the world we live in now, that could happen. This place was protected specifically at one point, for example, and I mean, I guess like it's worth it to love it. It's worth it to love these places and to caretake, even knowing that it could get taken or destroyed, because if we don't try, then what? I think so many people in this world like numb themselves from even the love so that it can't feel that pain too of the loss, and Yeah.
I used to go to the Department of Forestry and get copies of the timber harvest plans to see where they were planning to cut. And then I would trespass and hike out into the forest, knowing that I might be the last person to just look at these trees with awe and respect and breathe in their splendor, because the next week, the next month, the loggers would arrive with their chainsaws, and the noise of the logging crews and the destruction of felling the ancient trees. And it felt important to me. I don't think I ever thought that it would change anything just by being there and witnessing it. But the truth is that through that kind of action, I was actually changing myself. And it was actually giving me that perspective and that appreciation, and hopefully imparting some of the wisdom of that place to me. And I would look at the trees and I would think, maybe when I die, I'll be lucky enough to go wherever it is that your spirits are headed to.
On the gray sea, my mother stood looking back at me. She walked toward the sea, the waves took her from me. My mother, longing to go. Where is your soul to leave your eyes so dark, to leave me here alone? They move under the water. Low, low, they go toward home.
So I'm a certified nature and forest therapy guide by the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides and Programs. As a nature and forest therapy guide, I take groups out. We don't go as far as on a hike. It's not really an exercise in hiking. It's not really the naturalist walks. I do give more naturalist focused walks. It's really an opportunity to reconnect your senses to the natural world. So we focus on slowing down. We focus on disconnecting ourselves from the technology that we're often plugged into 24/7 in the modern world. We focus on noticing what's around us and how we feel in different landscapes and different settings, and just on connecting our senses back into the natural world and feeling what it feels like to be a natural human in a natural setting. So we do this in groups because cultural repair arises with ecological repair. And sharing what we're observing and what we're feeling and how we're responding to these environments together normalizes that as a human behavior and a human response. So it's not about a certain type of experience. I really try to facilitate for everyone to feel comfortable with whatever they're at and whatever they're noticing and observing, and give everyone an opportunity to reflect on what their senses are drawing in.
And how is your activism work connected to that? Do you feel like it led you towards that?
Yeah, it most definitely did. I wanted to get away from the confrontational aspects of the environmental world. It felt like it wasn't healthy for me personally, and it didn't feel like a productive direction to go in. I felt too personally my connection to the earth, and so when people would say like, oh, we don't need that forest, it's not important, it was almost like they were saying, oh, you don't need to be able to smell, you don't need a hand, you don't need part of my own being. And I got into public health because it just seemed like I wasn't going to find people who were saying, well, human health isn't important, people don't need to be healthy. And there's still controversy, there's still a lot of activism to be found within the health world and the public health community in particular. But I found it more manageable because we can all agree that being healthy really just, quality of life is just so important. If you don't have, a pain-free existence, it's really hard to enjoy and contribute meaningfully to society, to your family. So the forest therapy, it's connected to what in Japan is known as Shinrin-yoku, which translates literally as forest bathing. And you can stay dry. It's really bathing your senses in the atmosphere of the forest. And Japan is an incredibly urban, built-up society, and they were noticing a lot of chronic illness among urban office workers. And through a large partnership over the last few decades between their Department of Health and Department of Forestry, they've built a number of these forest bases around the country. And those are places where people are bussed from the cities out there. They meet with a doctor, check their blood pressure, and they're almost prescribed. Walk through, observe the falling, cherry blossom petals, or sit and meditate by this waterfall. And they notice, because they've built, very advanced sensors for all of this, that blood pressure decreases, immune response improves, more resilience to stress, and the effect lasts 5 days to a week, and then people need to go and get another dose of nature. And it is the most cost-affordable way for people to keep themselves healthy. There are compounds in the trees labeled phytoncides. A lot of them are terpenes and different aromatic compounds, and they're actually the tree's signals to each other to beware of predation or other kinds of illness or attack. And they signal our immune systems also to increase in strength. So breathing the clean air, breathing the smell of the trees actually increases our body's resilience to stress and disease. And the sort of relaxation that comes in nature is incredibly helpful for PTSD and different kind of traumatic situations. Different at-risk populations like veterans or families that have been supporting children with terminal illness, people who've experienced violence and different traumas, coming through that can find that nature provides them a place to feel safe and unpack and address those experiences and realign their whole neurologic, psychologic being to a more harmonious ecology with the outer world.
It's in our genes to be on the land, you know? We're responding to what our bodies know so well. Yeah.
It truly is. It's truly just a little tiny blip in our history that we move at these incredibly fast highway speeds, that we communicate so instantaneously. You know, our fight or flight system has been primed to get us out of danger. But once we're out of danger, we used to be able to calm ourselves back down and restore our natural attention states. The kinds of stress that people deal with in this modern age, there's no end point to it. We're never given a clear signal of safety to return to a secure and calm way of being. So nature, and specifically intentional nature therapy activities, allow us to tell ourselves that at least right now we're safe.
Yeah. As we listen to the birds. Well, is there anything you want to leave with the audience that listens to the Ground Shots podcast, just with your perspective and your experience in your life thus far? And yeah, is there any last thoughts you want to leave us with? No pressure.
Whether it's just a tree outside your window, or a park down the street, or a mountain retreat that you visited as a child, or some hike you've been hoping to go on, take some time out of your busy lives or not so busy lives and really just appreciate the beauty that's around us, because it's so much bigger than us. We could never recreate the grandeur that is a tree. These kinds of things are really like gifts. However your spirituality plays out, they're gifts from the creator of this world. And this world is entrusted to us in our care. We literally have the power to preserve or destroy this world. And whether or not we individually have that power to preserve it, we have the power to appreciate it as deeply as we can. And I think that is really the true responsibility that we're entrusted with, is how much can you care for the land, and how can you express that care in the most appreciating and deserving and nurturing way. And it's really healing for us as well.
Well, thanks for sitting down and talking to me, and I'm glad I met you, and I really appreciate your perspective and everything you shared with me, and I hope we get to meet again somewhere on the land. And yeah.
You too, Kelly, and be well, all you listeners at home and abroad.
You just listened to a conversation with Ramona Moonflower. The music for this episode was by West of Rhone, and the song was called The Grey Ghost. And you'll be able to find West of Rhone's music in the podcast show notes, so go ahead and check that out. Their Bandcamp and buy their music. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Ramona, and until next time, y'all, thanks for listening. This episode of the Ground Shots podcast was produced by Opia Creative. Our music is by Mother Marrow. If you'd like to help us continue to make this audio project a reality, consider becoming a monthly supporter on our Patreon page at patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt, where we have rewards like entry into patron-only giveaways, additional audio interviews, extra educational content, and much more. You can also share our work and give us a review on iTunes. Visit our website at ofsedgeandsalt.com to see what else we're up to and a log of our episodes when they come out. Check out our show notes for information about how to find us and our guests. Until next time, y'all, thanks for listening.